Ladies and gentlemen, Team 49.
So just before we begin the actual presentation, we thought we'd just introduce ourselves, just our names, so that you guys know what to call us during question period.
I'm Christina.
Oh, great, you guys are mic. I'm Hyungu.
I'm Olivia. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Danielle.
Could we just see the timer, just so that we know? Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Annie, bonjour. Good afternoon. We're members of the Enville Aquatic Conservation Group. It's a small community just to the east of Peterborough, and we're here today to discuss silver carp. Silver carp is one of 4 species of Asian carp, a class 1 invasive from Southeast Asia. What it does is it's a filter feeder. It consumes phytoplankton, it consumes zooplankton, and it dismantles food webs from the bottom up. This is actually quite nerve-wracking for communities like Ennsville and all the communities on the Thon Lake watershed, because a lot of our culture and a lot of our economy depends on the land. And because of this dependence on the land, we have a strong history of positive stewardship. You can see this in our soils. They're limestone-based, slightly basic. They acted as pH buffers when acid rain came through the area, and they continue to act as metal filtration systems against toxins like lead. They maintain our water quality. You can see this in our forests, which benefit from healthy soils, particularly in riparian zones by the streams and rivers that feed into rainy, sunny, and stormy lake. We don't have to worry about erosion because the strong root systems of the understory and the canopy prevent dirt and other contaminants from entering into the water. And you can see this because of our healthy soils and because of our healthy forests in wildlife. For example, we're the hosts of the Fowler's toad. It's an endangered amphibious species native to Canada, losing its foothold in other regions. It's a testament to our biodiversity. It's a testament to the biotic resistance that our ecosystem already has towards invasives. And it's a testament to what we can lose if we don't act decisively against silver carp right now. And since we're part of the Enville Aquatic Conservation Group, we've developed an integrated pest management plan specifically for the silver carp. It's composed of two sections. So the first section is a 10-week intensive removal program designed around the breeding behaviors of silver carp during the summer. And that will be followed up by a more long-term research and monitoring program during the overwintering season and during the spring. In front of you, for the judges, you'll see one document that opens up. It's a work plan with more details about our schedule for the timeline. That's it, you got it. Feel free to refer through it. Feel free to pass it around over the course of the presentation.
So, as Hyungu mentioned, the first part of our plan is our 10-week plan, and that is the 4 A's: assessing, alerting, acting, and adapting. Now, the first step of most invasive species management plans would usually be prevention. However, we kind of skip that step because the silver carp are already in our wetlands, in our watershed. So what we need to work on instead is preventing it from spreading and assessing where it is right now. The best way to do that is to look at the pathways of introduction. We know that there's a community of silver carp approximately 400 kilometers away, so we presume that one of the pathways of introduction was probably just fishermen unintentionally bringing it through using in their bait buckets or in their live wells that they did not clean properly before moving into Rainy Lake, as you can see there. We have found the silver carp in those 2 areas marked by red stars, which are primarily around Rainy Lake but close to Stormy Lake. So we think that is where the fishermen primarily fish, and that's what we believe is the major pathway. Now, what we also need to do, though, is see how far it is spread. So we will be using eDNA to do that. eDNA is great because it allows us to see whether or not the invasive species has been in the area. They do not have to be in the area at that exact moment, so it shows us the spread of the silver carp. We will be doing that both in Rainy Lake, Sunny Lake, Stormy Lake, but also in surrounding areas in case the silver carp have already been introduced into the surrounding communities. After we have done our eDNA testing and have found where the silver carp is, we will be using electrofishing on the areas that tested positive for silver carp. That will tell us more about the species, how many there are, whether they're breeding or fertile, as well as perhaps age, so that we know maybe are they juveniles or have they been there for a longer amount of time. And of course, if we catch any Asian carp with the electrofishing, we will remove them from the lakes.
The second step in our management plan is called alert. It will begin at the same time as assess, however it will continue on even after assess is finished. Alert will involve not only informing citizens in the area, but also people and organizations who have access to resources that could possibly help our management plan. To begin, we will create a working group comprised of key stakeholders such as governmental and non-governmental organizations, including the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, as well as Trent University and leaders of local First Nations communities. In addition to these, the working group will consult with other important stakeholders such as the local cottage association, recreational anglers, and seasonal land users. Together, these members will direct the plan that we will come up with as a team. One of the resources that we would like to introduce in our plan is called EdMaps. EdMaps is a public online research tool for citizen science, where citizens who do not have an academic background in this field can still report invasive species. In order to use this resource effectively, we will implement a training plan where we will, so that not only will citizens become familiar with this app, but also the scientific community will be able to use the data gathered from this important resource. In addition, we will implement a public education program. We will create posters and brochures to familiarize citizens with Asian carp and encourage them to use good boating and fishing practices. We would also like to target youth by creating opportunities for them to involve themselves in our management program. We hope that by doing this, we will create leaders in these communities who will inspire others to join the fight against invasive species. Today we have provided some sample documents of some of the posters that we may create in our program. Finally, it is extremely important that we receive free, prior, informed consent from the First Nations people in this area before we begin to make any changes. In addition, we will invite them onto the program to review any and all of the strategies that we will implement.
The next part of our plan is ACT, and that's the actual physical removal of the species. Our ultimate goal is elimination. However, since spawning season has begun, elimination within this season seems pretty impractical. So we've developed the short-term goal of reducing the growth and spread of invasive carp for the next year. Our priorities for this include maintaining the natural resources of the area and protecting them, and long-term sustainability. In terms of physical removal, our primary method would be electrofishing, and we would take advantage of the current spawning season, making the carp come to us rather than us having to go to the carp. We would do this by placing our fishing vessel within the river where we found the carp, 25 kilometers upstream. And as we know that Asian carp in North America have to travel 30 kilometers upstream in order to spawn, we would force them to pass underneath our vessel, allowing us to catch more and more carp. We would also use spike nets, which we would place around shallow water and around riverbeds. In partnership with these, we would use scented lures, which use the female sex pheromones of the Asian carp in order to attract the males. We would also use poison pills, which are a relatively new technology that are designed to specifically target intestinal enzymes that are only in silver carp. In order to prevent further spread, we would use physical barriers like nets for areas that we deem high risk. We would also be constantly monitoring nearby waterways and aquatic ecosystems to make sure that if the invasive carp escape Rainy Lake, that we know when and where. Lastly, like Christina mentioned, we would be implementing an awareness plan that specifically targets anglers. And this would be done because without the knowledge of how they can stop an invasive species, we can't make any change. So this is where a live well and bait bucket legislation comes in. This would prohibit the transportation of water from one body of water to another through live wells and bait buckets. It would be punishable by a fine. Now, we predict that there will be political backlash, as there always is in situations where habits have to change. But we would combat this using community awareness programs and town hall meetings, making sure that everyone in the area and the public really know that the necessity and the consequences of not acting immediately.
The fourth and final step of our plan is to adapt. Now, this is what we would really be focusing on if it turns out that eradication of this species is not going to be possible in this region. It's going to be long-term, and it's going to aim to reduce the negative impact of the silver carp in this region and keep our wonderful ecosystem as sustainable and viable and healthy as possible. What will mainly be involved with this is continuous and regular mechanical removal using methods Olivia just mentioned, such as the electrofishing and the netting. In addition, there would be significant funds given to research in order to determine more about the species and also to come up with new and better ways of controlling them and possibly eradicating them in the further future. In addition to this, continued assessment is a major portion of adapting plan. As you can see, the circular plan, all of the aspects feed into each other, and continual assessment is crucial so we maintain up-to-date and complete knowledge of the silver carp. We need to know the population spread, its size, various aspects like that, as well as their behavior and any conditions for their survival, because these factors do often change when invasive species enter a new ecosystem. We will be doing this through regular eDNA collection, as well as Christina mentioned, the use of citizen science and maps to track their location and spread and all of that information. A second thing we would be assessing is the terrestrial ecosystem surrounding this aquatic ecosystem. If there is any decrease in the viability and health of the forestry or the soil or the wildlife, this would have a negative impact on the aquatic ecosystem since they are all interrelated. And given the aquatic ecosystem is already less sound with this invasive species present, we can't afford it to become even less sound and viable and strong. So we would be ensuring that the soil is still of a high quality and still sequestering that lead and cadmium that may be coming, and ensuring that the water that percolates through is clean and is of a good pH when it enters the waterways. We would be ensuring that the riparian zones are still strong and viable and are not allowing lots of sediment and runoff to enter into our waterways. And we would be ensuring that keystone species remain at healthy levels so that the trophic cascade does not occur to further alter the food web and food chain. Our final area of assessment would be in terms of making sure that more invasive species do not enter into this zone. The concept of invasion meltdown is that when an invasive species enters a zone, it can alter the ecosystem and make that area more likely to be infected by another invasive species. And both of those invasive species can cause much more damage than one invasive species otherwise would. In this case, there's the zebra mussel. Now, the zebra mussel and the silver carp both feed on phytoplankton. However, since they feed on different species, they do not occupy the same ecological niche and thus do not compete. However, the zebra mussel fecal matter has been shown to be a source of food for the silver carp, and thus providing them with another food source would probably increase their population even more. This is according to Becky Cudmore of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So we'd be looking at that. In terms of invasives in general, there is no way to 100% guarantee that more invasives do not enter into this area, but we have nets set up for the silver carp, and these would also prevent other species of Asian carp from entering. And this community is now already on the lookout and more educated of and aware of invasive species, and we also already have a plan in place for this region. So should another invasive species arrive, we do feel that we are adequately supported to deal with them.
And laying down this kind of infrastructure, laying down this kind of precedent for response and for community networking requires funds. We've put together a preliminary budget that you can see to our side here. The total estimated cost for the entire project comes out to $1.5 million. And the reason for that is that the testing and the removal techniques we're going to be employing are actually quite expensive. Things like eDNA require labs, electrofishing require trained professionals just because it is a hazardous task. And just because of the nature of the removal techniques we will be employing, 60% of our funds will be going toward that segment of our program. The next biggest segment, as you can see, is research. Danielle was mentioning this earlier. We are at the leading edge of the infestation in North America, and so it is critical that we not only contribute to the research by saying this is what we've been trying, this is how it's been working out, but also that we read up on the research and try new things and report back and make sure that all of our techniques are up to date. And this also requires trained professionals. It requires people who are on the ground surveying and collecting data. So that's definitely a priority for our team. The third section is community outreach. Christina and Amanda mentioned it earlier on in the presentation. The reason that we are considering this a priority is because without community outreach and without buy-in from local land users, the momentum on the ground won't be there. There are huge things that anglers and fishers, 140,000 of them every single year, can do to help us monitor this species and can do to help us remove this species. And so we are going to make sure that we put resources there to make sure that they get to the tutorials that they need, that the kids get to identify what an Asian carp is, and etc. The last breakdown of costs comes out to administrative. It's a smaller section because it's going to be a small staff team who are going to be booking venues for workshops, who are going to be researching professionals, hiring consultant teams, and they're going to be active beyond the 10-week intensive program because they're also going to be doing the administrative work behind the researching and the monitoring. So it comes out to $1.5 million, but don't worry, we won't be going to the government for all of this money. We'll be contacting the Bean Foundation, the TD, Friends of the Environment Fund, and the Ontario Trillium Fund for other sources of support.
Now, this may seem like a lot of money, but we also have to analyze the cost of doing nothing, both ecologically or environmentally, socioculturally or in terms of safety, and also economically. If we do nothing to stop the spread of the silver carp throughout this area. In terms of the ecological impact, there are three main concerns. Now, because silver carp feeds on phytoplankton and can consume up to 20% of its mass in phytoplankton every day, according to Ontario's Invading Species Awareness Program, this can significantly reduce the amount of phytoplankton present in the lake, which will allow for increases in green algae in the lake since the two do occupy a similar niche. The increases in green algae would cause algal blooms and hypereutrophication, which would decrease the oxygen levels in the lake and result in the death of many aquatic species who rely on that oxygen. In addition, the species of green algae, Cladophora, is a host for several types of bacteria which release toxic chemicals into the water, which would be harmful for the water quality. Secondly, the presence of the silver carp is it causes a significant threat to the food chain that we have established in this aquatic region because in all areas. So the juveniles compete for space and nutrients with the juveniles of native species in protected wetland areas. The adults, they take food sources, the phytoplankton, away from other plankton feeders, native plankton feeders such as the cisco and the bloater. And finally, because the cisco and the bloater, their populations would be reduced, the large piscivores who rely on those smaller fish for food, such as lake trout and salmon, their populations would also be reduced, and thus we would see a really huge loss in biodiversity and a lot less healthy ecosystem in the lake. Finally, according to the risk assessment we were given by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, there is a medium risk of a pathogen being introduced along with the silver carp in this region. And this pathogen would negatively affect many fish species, such as the cyprinid family, a member of which is a bighead minnow. And so we really need to, this would be a huge negative impact in all areas of aquatic life.
This has many negative impacts on the ecology, but it also has many social ramifications. This watershed is primarily an area for recreation, which means that we have many anglers coming into the area, as well as 50,000 cottagers. One problem with losing all of the native species is that the anglers will not be able to catch fish. As well, the algae that Danielle mentioned earlier has a tendency to get caught up in the boat engines, as well as on the fishing poles, making it that much more difficult. The Asian carp also has a tendency to jump in North America, and this means that it's a 40-kilogram fish that is jumping into the air that can cause concussions or broken bones to anyone doing recreational boating or kayaking or even jet skiing. In it, as well, there's a risk to swimmers because according to the risk assessment from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, that algae that was mentioned can produce toxins and can be a health hazard to swimmers. Finally, there's a major impact on our Indigenous community that lives along the north shore of Rainy Lake. They require fish for both sustenance and for ceremony, and it's an important part of their culture. So the loss of the native fish could be an immense loss to the community.
And in addition to the ecological, social, and cultural impacts of the silver carp, there are also hard economic realities to face when it comes to infestation. The 140,000 anglers and fishers who come here every year and the 50,000 cottagers who come here every year bring in $200 million annually to the local economy, and that's huge. In addition, the ecological services, the basic life-sustaining services provided by the wetland, provided by the lake and the watershed, come out to a value of $975 million, and that's just an estimate. In the long term, it could be 23 times it could be 23 times $1.5 million, our initial budget, that our community could have to pay if they hesitate now. If they hesitate now, the costs balloon because silver carp are such aggressive competitors and such aggressive reproducers, and their impacts on native ecosystems aren't even fully understood. So we've described our plan, we've described the 4 A's: assess, alert, act, and adapt. We've discussed the cost of doing nothing, we've discussed the cost of doing something, and at this point we'd like to open up the floor to you guys for any questions, concerns, or points of clarification. Thank you, merci, miigwech.
Okay, so your plan will cost $1.5 million. If you only got half of that, where would you put your priorities?
Well, first of all, I think we need to look right now at doing some removal right off the bat before establishment has really taken hold. It is really important because once establishment happens, it is many times harder to actually remove this species. And so it will be cheaper for us if we invest much more in it now in the immediate than in the long term if we let it develop a little bit more. I think personally we would have to cut back on the research component. As extremely important as that is, it is a more long term, it pays off in the long term and not the short term, and we could get started now on the short term aspects of removal and the community outreach, and then hopefully as our program takes hold we could apply for more money and possibly get that.
We can also save money by using volunteers at the local high school, or even if we partner with Trent or Fleming College, we can use volunteers from there as well as their supplies for electrofishing or for the eDNA to help us reduce our costs, as many of the costs are in the startup costs for the machines and not in the operation costs. Thank you.
How would you measure the short-term and long-term effects of your plan?
Well, one definite thing would be if we notice a change in the amount of Asian carp that we are finding in Rainy Lake. So if, for example, the next year we see that tons of fishermen are coming to us saying, we've seen this fish and it's everywhere, then we'd know that it wasn't working, versus if we had less and less spottings of it, then we would know that's working. As well, like we mentioned, we would use eDNA testing and monitoring, and the nets and the electrofishing. The amount of fish we caught in that would also be a good indicator, as well as we would look at the entire ecosystem in general to see if are the warning signs that we would see if an invasive species were invading. So we would look for those indicators, as well as looking at the amount of spottings that we have and if the DNA evidence is there.
How would you go about building a sense of community support around this issue?
So this is where community outreach is extremely important. Basically, we want to involve the public, we want to involve youth, and we want to involve people who are directly affected, like anglers and, for example, boaters, in this program. So through through the funding that we have allocated to community outreach, we're going to create posters, we're going to hold workshops, we're going to have meetings, and we're going to make sure that the community is well informed. And if the community is informed, they'll be more likely to work together to try and eradicate the species.
And an important consideration for this too is that a lot of the community are well aware of the land. They know that they enjoy swimming, or they know that they enjoy fishing. They know that they enjoy taking hikes. So a lot of them will have an initial investment already that is quite high to take care of the ecosystem. But in addition to this, we can run a whole plethora of events. It could be very serious things like town halls or consultations, or it could be fun things like let's barbecue some Asian carp because apparently they're good eating. Regardless of what we do, as long as we make it fun, as long as we keep it intergenerational and allow people to come together over how much they care about keeping the land for their kids, chances are we think that our plan would be successful.
All right. How would you sustain the momentum of your plan over the longer term?
I gave my handheld mic. I guess in the long term, it would be direct communication with the community. If the community sees success, then they'd be motivated to keep on with the plan because it's working. If the community doesn't see success, they'd be even more motivated to stay with the plan because it's not working. Regardless, the community really depends on the land. The community sees it every single day. And so on the ground, not in terms of academia and not in terms of the science. The community members will probably be the backbone of that momentum, because they'll be the ones rallying politicians to do funding for this stuff, or they'll be the ones calling fundraising to bring in consultation teams. And so that's why we made them a priority after research and actual removal.
As well, we would, with the law that Olivia mentioned in terms of the live wells and removing that when moving to a new location, this would be a constant reminder to anglers and fishers of the area that this is a concern and we are worried about invasives in the area. We would partner some advertisements along with that, such as the Don't Move Forward advertisements that are running through Ontario currently to fight insects such as the emerald ash borer. And so this would be a constant reminder to the adults. As well, we could talk to the local schools and communities to get information about invasive species and their impacts on the environment integrated into the local curriculum, because this really ensures that our young people are educated and invested in this moving forward and makes it sustainable in the very long term.
Would your plan be adaptable to other invasive species?
Well, it wouldn't be directly adaptable to all invasive species because, for example, if we're combating emerald ash borer, we wouldn't be looking necessarily at the aquatic ecosystem to look for indicators. So it wouldn't be directly applicable, but the important thing is that once you've dealt with one invasive species, you have a management plan. And once you have the core of a management plan, you can build on top of that. So you can say, looking at these 4 steps, I can adapt them and change them to make them work for another invasive species by altering them to fit our needs. So that is something that's really important, because even if something completely different comes in, we still have the infrastructure to deal with that in future, rather than only being able to deal with one thing because we were just like, let's kill it all, and then we're done, if that makes sense.
You've produced an excellent report in just one day. If you had more time, what areas of the report would you focus on?
Probably one of the major areas would be trying to work out the budget a little bit more specifically. So it's very important when we're trying to talk to stakeholders and when we're trying to figure it out to see exactly how much things are going to cost. So for us, we know that we definitely need to do the research and we definitely need to use these exact removal methods, but we need to see how much different methods will cost, and we need to see how are we going to back that. Because having a plan is wonderful, but if we aren't going to get the money for it, then it's not going to work. So we need to also be able to talk to local communities and see, will we be able to get that equipment? Will we be able to to get people to fund us and get the grants? Because that really is the only way that this plan is going to work.
Additionally, we have made a lot of assumptions in this plan because we didn't have time to assess the current levels. Mm-hmm. We don't even have complete 100% confirmation that that it is in this area, the silver carp. We have had 2 spottings, which is pretty decent confirmation, which is why we put the plan in order. But we would need an actual scientist to take a look at a species in this area and confirm, yes, the silver carp is here. Yes, we can put this plan into motion. As well, we could use, if we had more time, assess the current levels so we have a better understanding of what we need to do right now. Yes, so we've made these assumptions, and if we had more time, we'd do a little bit of research and thus be able to have a plan that was more founded in fact.
How would you market the benefits of your plan?
So as we know, invasive species have a lot of detrimental effects on not just the ecosystem, but also the economy. For example, the silver carp is a huge problem because it has a lot of environmental effects, and the environment provides a lot of, is a big part of the economy, like sightseeing and tourism. And it's also a problem for swimmers and boaters because it jumps so far out of the water. It's a physical danger because it outcompetes native species. It's bad for anglers who make money from the fish trade. So basically, the benefits of our plan is that we're getting rid of this very dangerous, very detrimental invasive species and returning the ecosystem and to the way it's supposed to be.
One of the major, I guess, part of this is that people don't right away understand that the detrimental impacts that the carp can have. So they haven't seen it in action yet. Only one person has really seen it. So they wouldn't understand why we're using this action. So part of that is our community outreach program. And we need to tell them the risks of what would happen without it so that they can understand why we are trying to prevent it. And even though our end result is basically the lake to stay exactly the way it is right now, minus the 1 or 2 Asian carp sightings, we want to make sure that the cottagers and the anglers and everybody else in this community understand what could happen so that they know why we are putting this plan into action and what we are avoiding.
Team 49.